Good evening, my holy sisters and brothers. That's Rabbi Shlomo Katz singing his song Ka Ribon as we keep working our way through his Live in Melbourne album. How's everybody doing? We've got some joyful learning to do tonight. So let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we get together on a Tuesday evening? Pauline in Arkansas, Stephen in New Hampshire, John in Maine, Tom says shalom, Melissa in Great Neck, Paula in Chicago, Gwen saying shalom to all, Hannah in New York, Yehuda in South Carolina, John in Sedona, James in Indianapolis, John in Michigan, Randy in Florida, Rose in New Mexico, Bill in Missouri, Lucy in Minnesota, Paul in the Great Northwest, David in Notre Dame, Renee in Indiana, Nancy in North Carolina, it skipped on me, Pam in Nashville, Paula, blessings to all, have a great class. Over there on the YouTube side, Marjorie in Atlanta and Gigi in British Columbia. Welcome everybody. It's Elul. Let's hear the shofar. A little bit different than the pattern we've been doing. That was a tekiah, a teruah, and a tekiah, which is going to be mentioned on today's page. Today's class is dedicated by Regina Daly in memory of Sima. May Sima's neshama have a great aliyah, a great elevation in the world of souls. And Regina, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. We thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people by sponsoring an episode of AT Daily. We mentioned a couple times in the last few days that during Sukkot and again during Shemini Atzeret, which it means the 8th day of assembly, it's the 8th day of Sukkot, but it's not Sukkot, right? It's the 8th day after Sukkot began, but Shemini Atzeret is its own festival. And one of the things that characterizes any festival, meaning Passover, Shavuos, Sukkot, and Shemini Atzeret, right? There are other holidays, there's other kinds of holidays, but when we talk about the regalim, the pilgrimage festivals, we're talking about those four. And something that characterizes those four festivals is that we have a special Amida, a special Shemona Esrei, meaning the central prayer of any Jewish prayer service that is unique during the days of those festivals. We also mention it during the Birkat Hamazon. We mention it during the grace after meals, and we'll say Shekahianu on the first day of the festivals. So I thought I would just share, like the sort of really relevant part of the special Amidah, this special prayer, right? When the sages say the prayer, they mean the Amidah, meaning the standing prayer, or also called the Shemona Esrei, the 18 blessings, except there's not 18 blessings when we say it on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, because we don't make requests of the Lord for our well-being, the stuff that we need in our lives. We don't ask for those things during Shabbos or during the festivals. But we do make mention of the festivals. And this is what we said. In the middle of the Shemona Esrei, in the middle of the Amidah, we would say, and you, Lord our God, have given us in love. Now, if it happens to be Shabbos during the festival, we would then say, you have given us in love Sabbaths for rest, but if it's not Shabbos, and we would just continue, you have given us in love festivals for rejoicing, holy days and seasons for joy. If it's Shabbos, again, you mentioned this Sabbath day and this day of, and then we mentioned the festival day. Notice that we mentioned Shabbos first in both cases if it happens to be Shabbos, and that's because the holiness of something that we do more frequently actually comes first, is given priority over the holiness of something we do less frequently. You might think that things that are rare are going to be more special, but Shabbos, which comes every week, is actually the biggest holiday of all. At any rate, during the festivals, we would then say, so if it's not Shabbat, so it reads with a little more fluency, we would say, and you, O Lord, have given us in love festivals for rejoicing, holy days, and seasons for joy, this day of, if it's Passover, you say the festival of Matzos, the time of our freedom. If it's Shavuos, you would say the festival of Shavuos, the time of the giving of our Torah. If it's Sukkot or Sukkot, you would say the festival of Sukkot, our time of rejoicing. And if it's Shemini Atzeret, the 8th day after Sukkot began, you would say the festival of the 8th day, Shemini Atzeret, our time of rejoicing. Both Sukkot and Shemini Atzeret are called the time of rejoicing, and we're going to read why that is on today's page of the Talmud. You would continue, a holy assembly in memory of the exodus of Egypt. All 4 festivals were asked to recall the memory of our exodus, meaning when God redeemed us from slavery in Egypt. And we would continue, our God and God of our ancestors, may there rise, come, reach, appear, be favored, heard, regarded, and remembered before you our recollection and remembrance. Right? So we're saying to God, we are remembering how good you were to us, how you blessed us, how you saved us, how you continue to save us, right? And so as we are remembering, we want to stimulate you to remember us, right? And think well of us, be kind to us, judge us favorably. And so may it be regarded and remembered before you, our recollection and remembrance, as well as the remembrance of our ancestors and of the Messiah, son of David, your servant, and of Jerusalem, your holy city, and of all your people, the house of Israel, for deliverance and well-being, grace, loving kindness, and compassion, life and peace on this day of, if it's Passover, the festival of Matzos. If it's Shavuos, the festival of Shavuos. If it's Sukkot, the festival of Sukkot. If it's Shemini Atzeret, the festival of Shemini Atzeret. On it, remember us, Lord, our God, for good. Recollect us for blessing and deliver us for good lives. In accord with your promise of salvation and compassion, spare us and be gracious to us and have compassion on us and deliver us, for our eyes are turned to you, because you, God, are a gracious and compassionate King. Bestow on us, Lord our God, the blessings of your festivals for good life and peace, joy and gladness, as you desired and promised to bless us. Make us holy through your commandments and grant us a share in your Torah. Satisfy us with your goodness, gladden our souls with your salvation, and purify our hearts to serve you in truth. Grant us as our heritage, Lord our God, with joy and gladness, your holy festivals, and may all Israel who sanctify your name rejoice in you. Blessed are you, Lord, who sanctifies Israel and the festive seasons. So you can see the rejoicing of these words and the intimacy with the Holy One, blessed be He, that we invoke during the prayer on the festival days. I saw a video just the other day where a Chabad rabbi was talking about the fact that he'd been asked, does a Jew need to believe in God? And it was in the context of conversion. And he's explaining in the video, he's like, there's no rabbi on earth that would welcome a convert who said, well, I want to convert to Judaism, but I don't believe in God. And I didn't say anything to him. It was just a video. I wasn't going to comment. But I am familiar with a person who wanted to convert to Judaism for reasons of their own, but told the rabbi doing the conversion that this person doesn't believe in God. And it was a Reform rabbi, and the rabbi performed the conversion anyway. And the Chabad rabbi couldn't imagine that somebody would do that, and I think he's right? The Chabad rabbi was right in this. This other rabbi shouldn't have performed that conversion, right? Once you are a Jew, okay, if you become an atheist or you lose your faith or something like that, okay, well, you're still a Jew. No matter what your beliefs are, if you're a Jew, you're a Jew. But to become a Jew, to convert to Judaism, and to do so and say you don't believe in God, like when you hear these words that we just read, I mean, all of the prayers that we say when we pray 3 times a day bring us into incredible intimacy with God. They're all about, pleading with God, praising God, thanking God, joining God, asking God, cleaving to God. So why would you join any religion if you don't have that desire to come close to God? You may be unsure, you may not understand, you may have doubts, you may have trouble believing in this or that, etc. No problem. But so much of being a Jew, of practicing Judaism, is cleaving to God, right? It's being in relationship with God. What you're really trying to do is always deepen that relationship, strengthen that relationship, add more to that relationship, give back to God for all that He gives you. And you got to get into that, so when you say such words as I just read to you, they mean something. Okay. Let's get into today's page. We are on Daf 48, page Mem Ches. Where am I starting? And we are starting Mishnah number 3 of chapter 4 here in Tractate Sukkah. This is the 7th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of Sukkot. Mishnah number 3. This Mishnah elaborates upon the first Mishnah in this chapter. The obligation to recite Hallel, the songs of praise, basically Psalms 113 through 118, which is something that we will recite with joy, usually singing, every day of a festival and Rosh Chodesh, the beginnings of a new month. The obligation to recite Hallel and the mitzvah, the commandment of rejoicing on the festival. So you are commanded to rejoice on the festival. When the Holy Temple was standing, rejoicing on the festival included a very specific meaning that you would bring the festival peace offerings. You would slaughter these animals, which are for eating, right? You would slaughter them in the temple. You would give a little bit to the altar, but then you and your party would, have a big meat barbecue, as it were, right? You would eat meat. And our sages say elsewhere, there is no rejoicing without basar. There's no rejoicing without meat. That's not to say that vegans and vegetarians can't rejoice. Of course they can. But when the temple was standing, a big part of rejoicing was to eat meat. Now that the temple's destroyed, we don't bring festival peace offerings. We do still like to eat meat on holidays. Not everybody, but a lot of people do. And certainly the commandment to feel joy, to cultivate joy, to bring yourself to a state of joy, is a commandment on the festival. So the obligation to recite Hallel and the mitzvah of rejoicing on the festival by sacrificing and eating the meat of peace offerings are always for 8 days. The Mishnah explains how so. This teaches that a person is obligated in Hallel, reciting the Hallel, and the mitzvah of rejoicing, and in reverence for the last day of the festival, like he is for all the other days of the festival. That's the Mishnah. The Gemara. The Gemara asks, from where are these matters that on the 8th day of the festival one is obligated to rejoice? Where are these matters derived? It is as the sages taught. So what they're saying here is it's obvious to the sages that you are commanded to rejoice all the days of Sukkot. Now they're asking, how do we know that we're commanded to rejoice on Shemini Atzeret, on the 8th day, which is a separate festival unto itself? And it is as the sages taught that the verse states with regard to Sukkot, and you shall be altogether joyful. Deuteronomy 16:15. Now this verse, you shall be altogether joyful, it doesn't say you shall be joyful. It says you shall be altogether, like you shall be only joyful. You shall be totally joyful. You shall be exclusively joyful. Right? You shall be altogether joyful. The verse comes to include the evenings of the last day of the festival, i.e., then too one is obligated to rejoice by partaking of the meat of the peace offerings sacrificed the previous day. The peace offerings are sacrificed during the day, then you could eat them that night. Right? So on the 7th day of Sukkot, you might sacrifice the peace offerings and then you would eat them that following night, which is the first night of Shemini Atzeret. And the Gemara asks, does the verse come to include the evening of the 8th day, that first night, right? Hebrew days and festival days, all days on the Hebrew calendar begin the night before. So does the verse come to include the evening of the 8th day, meaning the night before, and then the 8th day is the next day? Or perhaps it comes to include only the evening of the first day of the festival. And the Gemara answers, when the verse says altogether, it is exclusionary, and it has distinguished this night from the other nights of the festival. And the Gemara asks, well, what did you see that led you to include the evenings of the last day of the festival, the night of Shemini Atzeret, in the mitzvah of rejoicing, and to exclude the evenings of the first day of the festival? Why not require one to sacrifice peace offerings on the afternoon preceding the festival to be eaten on the first night, similar to what we do on Passover? And the Gemara answers, I include the evenings of the last day of the festival, before which there is a day of rejoicing, as it is reasonable that the rejoicing should continue. And I exclude the evenings of the first day of the festival, before which there is not a day of rejoicing, as there is no obligation to sacrifice offerings on the afternoon preceding the festival. There is such an obligation for Passover, but not for the other festivals. Mishnah number 4. That was a very short Mishnah and Gemara. Mishnah number 4 here in chapter 4. The mitzvah of Sukkah, to dwell in the Sukkah, is 7 days. How does one fulfill this obligation for 7 full days? Well, when one finished eating on the 7th day, meaning when you finish your morning meal or lunch, right, as opposed to dinner the night before, which was also the 7th day. But then on the 7th day itself, during the daytime, when you finish that lunch, the daytime meal, he should not dismantle his sukkah. Now, we're not commanded to reside in the sukkah on Shemini Atzeret. Quite the contrary. We're commanded to dwell in the sukkah on Sukkot. Once we reach Shemini Atzeret, that has nothing to do with dwelling in the sukkah. So, once you have finished eating on the 7th day, he should not dismantle the sukkah immediately, because the obligation continues until the end of the day, until nightfall at the end of the 7th day. However, he takes the vessels down from the sukkah into the house. They say down from the sukkah because often the sukkahs were constructed on the roof of the house in ancient times. So he takes the vessels, right, the plates and pitchers and glasses, the eating ware that you had in the sukkah, and you take it down from the sukkah and into the house from mincha time, meaning the afternoon prayer, on the 7th day, and onward, in deference to the last day of the festival, when he will require the vessels in the house. You shouldn't eat the festive meal of Shemini Atzeret in the sukkah, because you're not commanded to dwell in the sukkah. And so to honor Shemini Atzeret as not just an add-on to Sukkot, but its own important festival, so now you shift situation, right? You're going to go eat dinner inside the house for Shemini Atzeret. That's the Mishnah, Gemara. And the Gemara asks, if one does not have vessels to take down from the sukkah, what should he do? And the Gemara asks, one does not have vessels, but when he utilized the sukkah during the festival of Sukkot, with what vessels did he eat when he utilized the sukkah? Rather, this is the question. If he has no place into which he can take down his vessels, and he must continue eating in the sukkah, right? What about a person who, came from far away, built a sukkah in Jerusalem, and he's been living in it and eating in it all during Sukkot. That is his residence during Sukkot. So he has no other residence to take those vessels into, no other place to have his dinner on the night of Shemini Atzeret. So what should this person do? If he has no place into which he can take down his vessels and he must continue eating in the sukkah, what is the halacha? What can he do to underscore the fact that he is eating there not to fulfill the mitzvah of dwelling in the sukkah, which no longer applies on Shemini Atzeret, and thereby violating the prohibition against adding to the mitzvahs of the Torah if he was eating in the sukkah on Shemini Atzeret on purpose? He's only eating there because he has no other place to eat, not because he thinks that you are required to dwell in the sukkah on Shemini Atzeret. So what should he do? Rabbi Chiya bar Rav said he reduces the roofing of the sukkah by 4 handbreadths, thereby rendering the sukkah unfit. We already learned that if you have an opening 3 handbreadths or more, or if there's unfit material in the roofing that is not qualified to be the roofing material of a sukkah, and it's 4 handbreadths wide, then it's not, the sukkah is disqualified. You can't fulfill your obligation on Sukkot to dwell in such a sukkah if the roofing is no good. It's been disqualified. But that is a good thing to do, to have your dinner there on Shemini Atzeret. If you have no alternative but to eat in the sukkah, you should render the sukkah unfit to show that you have no other place to eat, but Shemini Atzeret is its own holiday and you are no longer observing the precepts of Sukkot. You are now in the zone of Shemini Atzeret. And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said he lights a lamp inside the sukkah, which is prohibited during the festival of Sukkot. Now, when I first read that, I'm like, what? What do you mean you can't light a lamp inside the sukkah? Of course you can light a lamp inside the sukkah. You have very nice lighting inside the sukkah. But what they mean is they had a prohibition on lighting an oil lamp in a small sukkah whose roofing is made out of, plant matter detached from the ground. They prohibit it as a matter of safety, like fire code issue, that you might burn the sukkah down and have a conflagration. And the Gemara notes, and they do not disagree with regard to the halacha. Instead, they are providing different solutions for different locations. This is for us, who live outside of Eretz Yisrael, and that is for them who live inside Eretz Yisrael. The difference between the communities outside Israel and inside Israel is that inside Israel, they know that the 7th day of Sukkot is the final day of Sukkot. Outside of Israel, especially in ancient times, when there was that uncertainty about when the month began, and they have a 2 days for the first day of the festival and 2 days at the end, they're not sure if the 8th day is actually still Sukkot or if Shemini Atzeret has begun. And so they're dealing with that issue. Those who live in the land of Israel reduce the roofing, since the obligation to sit in the sukkah no longer applies. However, those who live outside the land of Israel, who are obligated to sit in the sukkah on the 8th day, because there is uncertainty that it might still be Sukkot, it might still be Sukkot, it might actually be only still the 7th day, they must find another way to distinguish the 8th day from the days of the festival of Sukkot. And the Gemara asks, well, this works out well with regard to a small sukkah, since it is prohibited to light a lamp due to the danger of conflagration. And lighting a lamp will underscore the distinction. However, with regard to a large sukkah in which there is no such prohibition and therefore no distinction, what can be said? And the Gemara answers, one underscores the distinction between Sukkot and Shemini Atzeret in that he brings eating vessels, in other words, pots in which food were cooked, into the sukkah. As Rava said, eating vessels are taken out of the sukkah. Drinking vessels remain in the sukkah. By leaving the pots and pans in the sukkah, he indicates that the sukkah is no longer involved in fulfillment of the mitzvah. Bottom line, you want to make a clear distinction between sukkahs and Shemini Atzeret. If you have to have a meal in the sukkah during Shemini Atzeret, better not to have meals in the sukkah during Shemini Atzeret. With regard to the rite of the water libation performed in the temple during the festival. This is Mishnah number 5. Mishnah number 5. Let me just read. So Sukkah on the last day of Sukkot, the law. What is the law today? After the morning meal on the 7th day of Sukkot, one may not dismantle the Sukkah. However, in the late afternoon, one may remove all the vessels that were used therein to prepare for the 8th day of assembly. If he has nowhere to place those vessels and he wishes to eat in the sukkah on the 8th day as well, he must remove a 4x4 handbreadth section of roofing as a conspicuous indicator that sitting in the sukkah is his intention, not that by sitting in the sukkah, it is not his intention to fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah. However, no indicator is required if one wishes to sit in the sukkah on any other day of the year. Outside the land of Israel, where we live, where one is required to sit in the sukkah on the 8th day because traditionally there was uncertainty that it might still be the 7th day. If one wishes to eat in the sukkah on the 9th day, he may not remove any roofing since the 8th day is a festival day. In that case, he must indicate that he does not intend to fulfill the mitzvah in a different way, for example, by bringing a lamp into a small sukkah or by bringing his cooking utensils into a large one. This is, the question of how to observe Shemini Atzeret with regard to the sukkah. It's nuanced. It's not so simple. I'm not going to cover it exactly, the rules right now. So it's worth reviewing those rules, right, during Sukkot before Shemini Atzeret. So you really get that right. Okay, Mishnah number 5. With regard to the rite of the water libation performed in the temple during the festival, how was it performed? So there's going to be a question about doing the water libation on the 8th day. But now we're going on to a new subject that we haven't really been talking about, which was all the days of Sukkot. There was a special ritual performed when the temple was standing, where there was a water libation poured on the altar. Drawing that water for it to be, you're going to fill jugs with this very pure spring water that's gathered near Jerusalem. And drawing that water, that was its own ceremony called the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, the rejoicing of the water drawing house. And there were just massive parties every night of Sukkot in ancient Jerusalem when they would do that. Once the temple was destroyed, the water libation was no more, but we continue to have parties during Sukkot, and we call them that, the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, the rejoicing of the water drawing house. So now we're going to be talking about that water libation. With regard to the rite of the water libation performed in the temple during the festival of Sukkot, how was it performed? One would fill a golden jug with a capacity of 3 lug with water from the Siloam pool. When those who went to bring the water reached the gate of the water, so called because the water for the libation was brought through that gate, leading to the temple courtyard, they sounded, this is with the shofar blast that I did at the beginning of the show tonight, a tekiah, a teruah, and another tekiah. Right, tekiah, teruah, tekiah. And the priests ascended the ramp of the altar and turned to his left. And there were 2 silver basins there into which he poured the water. Rabbi Yehuda said they were limestone basins, but they would blacken due to the wine and therefore looked like silver. And the 2 basins were perforated at the bottom with 2 thin, perforated nose-like protrusions. One of the basins used for the wine libation had a perforation that was broad, and one used for the water libation had a perforation that was thin, so that the flow of both the water and the wine, which do not have the same viscosity, all the more in ancient times when wine was just a much thicker thing, would conclude simultaneously. And the basin to the west of the altar was for water, and the basin to the east of the altar was for wine. However, if one poured the contents of the basin of water into the basin of wine, or the contents of the basin of wine into the basin of water, he fulfilled his obligation, as failure to pour the libation from the prescribed location does not disqualify the libation after the fact. Rabbi Yehuda says the basin for the water libation was not that large. Rather, one would pour the water with a vessel that had a capacity of 1 lug on all 8 days of the festival, and not only 7. And the appointee says to the one pouring the water into the silver basin, "Raise your hand," so that his actions would be visible, as one time a Sadducee priest, right? The Sadducees were this sect of people who did not accept the authority of the sages because they believed only in the written Torah and not in the oral law, which began with the transmission of the original oral commandments from God to Moses. There were just a few, and then the oral law grew and grew as the sages added ordinances to protect us from coming to violate written laws in the Torah. The Sadducees didn't submit to the authority of the sages. They were heretics and radicals. They are gone. They are no more. But when they were around in ancient times, there were actually Kohanim who were also Sadducees, right? So there were, from time to time, a kind of Sadducee priest would sneak through and be able to perform some of the rites of the holidays. And then they would try to sneak in their own version of doing things, and the crowd did not like it. And this was one of those times. So what happened? And the appointee says to the one pouring the water in the silver basin, raise your hand so that his actions would be visible. As there was an incident one time when a Sadducee priest intentionally poured the water on his own feet, as the Sadducees did not accept the oral tradition requiring water libation. And in their rage, all the people pelted him with their esrogim, with the citrons. Right, so the idea here is that the water libation is not explicitly detailed in the written Torah, but the fact that we do a water libation was commanded to Moses at Mount Sinai, so it's a halacha lemoshe mi Sinai. Rabbi Yehuda continues, as its performance during the week, so is its performance on Shabbos, except that on Shabbos one would not draw water. Instead, on Erev Shabbos, Friday afternoon, one would fill a golden barrel that was not consecrated for exclusive use in the temple from the Siloam pool, and he would place it in the temple chamber and draw water from there on Shabbos. You can't take water out of the well, water out of that spring on Shabbos. That's not permitted on Shabbos. So you bring the water up to the temple compound on Friday afternoon. If the water in that barrel happened to spill, or if it was exposed overnight, leading to the concern that a snake may have deposited poison in the water. That's the general reason given why the sages say you should never drink water that was left out overnight uncovered. Not a bad piece of wisdom right there. If the water was left exposed or the barrel spilled, one would fill the jug with water from the basin in the temple courtyard, the basin that the priests used for washing their hands and feet, and you could use that water for the libation on the altar, just in case the fresh water from the spring had been ruined in some way. As exposed wine or water is unfit for the altar. If it was left exposed, it is unfit for the altar. And just as it is prohibited for people to drink them due to the potential danger, so too they may not be poured on the altar. That was Mishnah number 5. Now we're just going to read 2 paragraphs of that Gemara, and then I'm coming to your comments and questions. With regard to the customs accompanying the drawing of the water, the Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? Rav Eina said that it is as the verse states in Isaiah, with joy, sason, the word sason, with joy you shall draw water out of the springs of salvation. Ushavtem mayim besason. That's a song that we often sing. With joy shall you draw water from the springs of salvation, indicating that the water has to be drawn from the spring, and the ritual must be performed with extreme joy. So we're observing that obligation detailed by the prophet Isaiah. Apropos this verse, the Gemara relates, there were these 2 heretics. This sounds almost like I don't even have a parable. What's the word I'm looking at? Like a folk tale. Right? So there were these 2 heretics, one named Sason and the other one named Simcha. Now these are both words for joy. But we could say, Sason means joy and happiness means simcha. But the words are somewhat interchangeable. And so in this story, they were actually not just the meanings joy and happiness, but they were actually 2 guys' names, right? The names were Sason and Simcha. And Sason said to Simcha, right? So joy said to happiness, I am superior to you. As it is written, they shall obtain joy and happiness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee. That's Isaiah 35:10. And so the verse mentions joy first. Well, then happiness said to joy, on the contrary, I am superior to you. As it is written in the book of Esther, there was happiness and joy for the Jews, right? There was Simcha and Sason for the Jews. We say that by Havdalah at the end of Shabbos. Sason said to Simcha, one day they will dismiss you and render you a messenger, as it is written, for you shall go out with happiness, you shall go out with Simcha, Isaiah 55:12. And Simcha said to Sason, one day they will dismiss you and draw water with you. As it is written, with Sason, with joy, you shall draw water. And the Gemara relates a similar incident. There was a certain heretic named Sason who said to Rabbi Abahu, you are all destined to draw water for me in the world to come. Like I will be exalted and you guys will just be water carriers for me. Meaning the sages, right? You are all destined to draw water for me in the world to come. As it is written, with Sason shall you draw water. Rabbi Abahu said to him, if it had been written for Sason, it would be as you say. Now that it is written with Sason, it means that the skin of that man, meaning you, will be rendered a wineskin and we will draw water with it. In other words, you'll die, and we'll use your skin as a bag to draw wine with. So just a little sort of gotcha folktale for the people that think they know better, and they're going to tease how superior they are because of their name. Okay, let's see if there are any comments or questions today. Charles Shapiro. I heard a Midrasha teacher tell the student who complained that he did not want to learn since he did not believe in God. And the teacher said, you don't have to believe in God, you just have to obey him. I like it. Very good, Charles, very good. And Sharon, as one who teaches kids in this day and age, I often have to work with kids to define what God's relationship with them is. It is not uncommon for them to be strongly skeptical. To be expected makes sense. I mean, like to develop a relationship with an invisible deity that most people have never heard from, it takes work. It takes care. It takes experience. Not everybody's ready for it, especially when we're kids, right? Kids can be so skeptical, especially if it means going to Hebrew school and doing chores and not being able to do things on Shabbat that other kids are able to do. Of course, the kids are going to be skeptical. And it's not easy. And even as adults, we have to work on faith. Faith is not easy. It does take work, right? But it's central to Judaism, and we should never forget that. Seraphim says, belief is not an unambiguous state of mind. What exactly constitutes belief? I know that I greatly desire God. Whether that would constitute belief in an orthodox sense, I am not sure. I don't think there's any clear-cut definition of what belief in God or faith in God means. But I love what you're saying, Seraphim, that you desire God, right? You desire that relationship. You desire to know more. You desire to experience God. Those things, especially to somebody for whom it doesn't come naturally, it's beautiful. Right? It's beautiful to want that relationship and to feel, I just have trouble believing it. It's hard for me. I'm skeptical. Show me, prove it to me. I'd love to see it. That kind of thing. Okay. What it really doesn't work is, somebody who wants to convert to Judaism and says, I am an atheist. Agnostic would work okay. Right? But somebody says there is no God. What are you doing, converting to Judaism? That's why we brought this up earlier. What was I just going to say? Some people are just lucky. They're just lucky. It's almost like they have a God sense built in. For whatever reason, it just makes sense to them that the world didn't burst into being for no reason, that it was desired, that there must be a God out there, that there is a creator, and therefore the creator would care about the creation, want relationship with the creation. Why is he hidden? There must be a reason, and these people want to know more. But that's not everybody. A lot of people just find these topics difficult. If that's you, if you're a skeptic and you find it difficult and you say, well, I'd like to learn more. I'd like to have that God sense. I'd like to develop faith. then you are already engaged in very holy work. And finally, Sharon, I have to check my Machzor, but I believe the ritual of saying farewell to the Sukkah is on the afternoon on the last day of Sukkot. I know my prior rabbi, blessed memory, used to say we should still eat in the Sukkah after services on Shemini Atzeret, but we should say the Kiddush in the sanctuary. Exactly. And I think we say goodbye on the last day of Sukkot. And then it's just tricky outside Israel versus inside Israel. And when we say goodbye to it, we'll kind of move the roofing to the side. We didn't read it today. It was mentioned that, just making an opening in the roofing kind of lets in the sun. It might make it unpleasant, and that's why you might replace the roofing with unfit roofing. But it's not simple, right? It's not simple. Even though we've been observing this for many, many years, I don't want to just categorically say how to do it. Because there's a lot of nuances to those laws, and it's worth exploring in greater detail and learning it for yourself. Okay, that's what I've got today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Wednesday, the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific for page 49. Have a terrific evening.